welcome back. It's really, it's good to be back in the studio, huh?
It is.
Yeah.
It's always a good time in the studio.
This is going to be a fun episode of BUILDCast. They always say, make sure you're in a room with people that are smarter than you. Whoo, boy. I think we've done that clearly here, although that's not terribly hard. Well, I don't mean to be so self-deprecating, but welcome back. And we're here today to talk about housing affordability.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it's been a buzzword for months, really years. I think if we were, a decade away from housing equilibrium before COVID, I don't know where we are right now, but it's exponentially worse. I was reading an article that the NAHB put out, and let me just go into this really quick before we introduce our guest. But NAHB stated that, or their data showed 64.8 million households out of 132 million are unable to afford a $250,000 home. That's a problem.
That's a major problem.
The median home price of a single family home is $425,000 plus. Yeah. A bigger problem. And according to NAHB, 73% of all households cannot afford median priced new home.
We have a crisis.
We do. So what we've done is bring together, some of the brightest minds in our opinion, that are actively working to communicate the challenges and ideally find solutions within the industry. We've got John Wright. John Wright is one of us. He's been a lender. You started your mortgage career in '93, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. And now he is with Fannie Mae working on their affordable housing goals. We've got Jennifer Castanson. She is the Vice President of Construction Project Management for software company BUILDCast and a contributing writer for innovation on Forbes. She is everywhere. I mean, when there's a conversation about manufactured, when there's a conversation about affordability, modular, all of those things, I always see her name attached to it. So, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And then we've got the Will Stoker. Will is an advisor for ESG, which is?
Oh, right ahead, Brian Hurd.
Environmental, social, and governance. And Will, I'll let you briefly tell everybody what that means, but we're really happy to have you here as well.
Yeah, so I sit at the kind of the top of the organization here at Fannie Mae, focused on our efforts to serve manufactured housing industry. So I lead a lot of our industry engagements with a broad variety of stakeholders and use that to inform our product development strategy for manufactured housing.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, let's just kind of dig right in. Just so y'all know the rules, there really are no rules. We try to keep this conversational. We want to make sure we're giving everybody their time, but, we'll just see where the conversation goes. But otherwise, what I'd love to open up with is, how did we get here? We know that there is a massive affordability crisis, but what are some thoughts on what got us here over the last 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatnot?
If we want to simplify, it's lack of supply. Nothing, not enough built to meet the demand. And that's oversimplification.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's really kind of at the crux of it, but let's dig a little deeper and go, why is there, is it lack of deliverable lots? Is it lack of, home builder confidence in building inventory? It's probably a combination of a number of things.
Labor.
Yeah, land itself.
Yeah. Materials.
Yeah, I don't know that there's one answer, Brian.
Yeah.
I think the easy answer, maybe the umbrella, is the supply, but there are a lot of different factors that have influenced that. You've got, like you just mentioned it, the materials and what we saw with the ramping up with the supply chain issues. That was COVID, but even before that, when we were working at Fannie Mae on some of the manufactured housing, initially with some of our newer products, the inventory was a problem. And we knew that, and we were trying to address that with additional housing types or housing stock. I think there's a lot of different factors that contributed to that. Another one is, just labor challenges. When things are great and areas building, you've got movement and transient, workforce where one builder may get another builder's, employees or the different laborers and skilled workers, and you start moving around and that creates challenges. So I'm with Jennifer. I think the supply is the initial, but then you've got a lot of different moving parts underneath that have contributed to where we are.
Sorry, go ahead, Jennifer.
There are certainly tons of levers. And I think that one of the things that I've been trying to focus on for quite a while now is about the fragmentation of the industry. So as long as there continues to be that fragmentation, meaning, the architects working over here, the distributors working here, the developers working here, and that all of these silos, then there cannot be a confluence to meet the demand and create efficiencies that are necessary in order to meet that demand. So that's something that I think that maybe isn't ignored, but is avoided, because as soon as you start breaking down those various verticals, then the relationships change. And it just is, people who have been working on that script for so long don't know how to work anymore.
Now, I think that's a really interesting thought, and you mentioned kind of that they're fragmented and all these different segments that make up home building and the housing market. Are you suggesting that, some sort of collective be made either locally, regionally, or nationally?
Well, I do think that, there's a lot of firms like Katerra tried to bring everything in-house. And I think the ones that are trying to do some sort of vertical integration within their organization will help us solve for some of those challenges. But I think that just having, when projects can start pre-design and involve all the stakeholders, we're going to be a lot smarter and be able to create better solutions to solve for this crisis. So I just think that I don't know if it's a collective. I don't really, it's hard to put a pulse on it, because you have to have willing stakeholders in order to get involved in that. I don't know if you keep having business as usual, as we've had for decades, then people still have business. And I think there's a fear of, risking not having that business moving forward if you change that dynamic.
Well, and I think the only concern I would have is if you have, a situation kind of where the rich get richer, you have these larger builders, and if they're bringing everything in house and they're controlling every aspect of it, that would be my only concern. But I love the idea of creating, at least on the local and regional level, a conversation between the municipalities, the designers, the builders, the realtor community, bringing all developer community, bringing them all together. Because as you say, you have to be on the same page to some extent, because if it's all siloed, you're all working for your own efforts and you're not doing anything collectively.
That, and two, I think we could potentially be missing one of the key elements in the question, right? The question was, why? How did we get here? Representing builders and developers across North America, I'm on the front line and I'm in the trenches. So I'm there from land acquisition all the way taking the product in the communities to launch. And as an example, in Texas, we're looking at right now, I've got several land deals getting ready to go under LOI. You can't get the deals for less than $100,000 an acre. And if I can't get the deal less than $100,000 an acre as a builder, I can't build a product that's going to hit a price point that the majority of Americans can own. So it's a supply is always an issue. I agree with you, Jennifer. But when we're looking at a 3.2 to 4 month inventory and builders unable to bring a product to market that is attainable, compounded with interest rates, I don't know. I think supply in many areas, I understand I'm localizing it, but it's also builders can't get on the forefront to build that right now. And so the conversation becomes, how do we get real with where we build, what we're building on it, what programs are offered in, and that we can reach that percentage of buyers who can't afford a home at $450,000. The builders simply can't build it right now.
Well, and I don't think lot supply or lot cost, land itself, is just not going to get cheaper. I mean, they're not making any more of it, as Mark Twain said, so I think and we'll talk about this a lot, hopefully on this call, is we've all been involved in some of these projects with manufactured and higher density to where you can put a substantially larger amount of homes on that 1 acre piece of property. So, Will, let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about, your thoughts and where Fannie Mae is putting efforts into affordable housing, manufactured, all that type of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, so John and I work pretty much exclusively on our manufactured housing programs. Manufactured housing industry has been around for a long time now, close to 50 years. But there's this brittleness and in some ways this unwillingness to change the way that they do things. That's I think
it's called NIMBYism.
It's called NIMBYism. Yeah, well, that's on the locale side, but I'm talking about like the supply side here.
True.
The traditional model for the way that these homes are sold, it's more akin to like a car dealership model, right, than something that we would be familiar with on the traditional like subdivision and builder front. So a lot of the work that we're trying to do is to convince traditional, subdivision builders and developers to buy into this product and use manufactured housing as a new way to build out their product stack and their delivery model, and put them in a position to hit a lower price point than what would be otherwise possible with traditional on-site construction. So we're starting to see some promising developments, I think, towards that goal. But obviously, we'd like to see it grow a lot faster and help to meet some of the demand that's out there.
Well, and part of the problem has been on my side of the industry. I think there is that tendency to kind of turn your nose up at that type of product, where it's just perception is a lot of it. I'd rather do $1 million loan than a $20,000, $100,000 loans, whatever the reasons are. But the challenge is if we're trying to get people to look at manufactured, modular, that sort of thing as an alternative, as we've talked about over the last several years on these bigger projects, we have to start acting like the site built builders, and that means how these loans are financed. And, and that's why, we've loved the partnerships, if I can say that, with Fannie Mae, because literally one of their focal points is MH Advantage, which truly does help change the way manufactured homes are financed. It's not a second class loan in any way, shape, or form. It's not a higher rate. You don't have all these LLPAs on it. In fact, in a lot of ways, it's actually easier to buy a manufactured home than a regular stick built. So I'm going to stick with either you, John, or Will. Why don't you talk about that a little bit? Fannie's specific efforts towards MH Advantage and financing these properties.
Yeah, I'll start and maybe Will can book in.
Yeah.
We started in I think it was around 2018, and we went to the industry. We didn't do it in a vacuum or a bubble where Fannie Mae tried to be the one to solve and solution everything alone. And so in that scope, the end premise was, how do we get a home that's built in a controlled environment with a lot of efficiency, with a lot of the characteristics that you would have within a site built from a quality standpoint, and bring that to market so that it doesn't automatically have, the consumer paradigm or that stigma of housing of last resort, right? Like, I can't get site built, so I got to settle for manufactured housing. So we baked in some of those aesthetics and, you call it curb appeal or whatever, that more closely emulated the site built looks. Things like, lower to grade sets. So sometimes with manufactured housing, because they're brought in on that chassis, when they're tied down, they don't dig out the foundation deep enough. So it's got a little bit of a raised look. It's fine, but we went with a little bit of a lower set as a requirement. You mentioned some of the financing options. The end goal was to say somebody driving down the street that would see one of these homes would look at it and say, well, I can't tell the difference whether or not it's built on site or it was built in a controlled environment and brought in, right, in a production plant. So I think that was part of it. I will say that the challenge initially, because this was new housing types, because we baked in requirements for these homes. It was new, so there was no existing. So everything was having to be done per order, one at a time. And that represented a challenge kind of getting it off the ground. But I think the end goal is still where we are. And Will mentioned the subdivision work. I think that's an important piece of that. So I don't know, Will, if you want to jump in with that side of it, or if you got any additional thoughts on the MH Advantage type financing.
Yeah. So we at Fannie Mae have spent a lot of time, as John said, trying to educate various stakeholders in the process on what we're trying to do here with MH Advantage and use our position in the market to help influence the broader conversation around affordability. The reality is that a lot of people don't know the role that Fannie Mae plays in the market. And if you're a consumer, you don't really have to care, right? Because the loan is being closed with the lender and everything that takes place on the secondary market's kind of behind the scenes. So for a while, it was just us, Fannie Mae, out there, evangelizing for the product. What's changed recently, and what I think will lead to some new adoption and some new probably positive press coverage, is we're starting to see some of these impartial perspectives out there, like in the academic community, come in and say communities and locales should be seriously considering manufactured housing as part of their affordable housing strategy. So just recently, there's a report from the Joint Center for Housing Studies at Harvard. They put out a report on the cost advantages of manufactured housing relative to site-built. And for the first time, they had some good data finally on our MH Advantage program and the houses that are eligible for that program. So the finding was that these MH Advantage or cross-mod style homes, as the industry calls them, that those homes can achieve a 20 to 30% cost savings relative to a comparable site-built home. And so, we've been out there, sharing our perspective, but it's nice to have others in the industry come in and say, this is something that makes sense and can provide some targeted affordability in neighborhoods across the country. And I think that's going to help with the adoption moving forward.
Yeah. One more point, Brian, just sorry, to what Will's talking about. We also, have kind of morphed and addressed the questions and the challenges with that product since inception. And one of the big changes was changing that comparable sale allowance for these homes, right? We allowed that initially where site-built comparables could be used, may be used, right? And still the builder-developer community, and probably rightly so, were a little reluctant because they weren't sure if they invested in this, if there was truly going to be an apple-to-apple comparison based on the end product versus what was in the market. Because our guidelines had required, a couple of manufactured home close sales. So we strengthened that language up in February of this year to say, you know what, if you've got an MH Advantage home and there aren't 3 MH Advantage comparables, then the appraiser has to use at least 2 site built. And we did that intentionally. We had feedback from the industry, we had feedback from our lenders, and we responded to say, we recognize this may be an obstacle. It could be something that would create reluctance at the builder developer level. So we're going to take it out. We're going to remove it. And hopefully we're starting to see very positive feedback from that. We're anticipating the end result is that those builder developers kind of use that as the last, okay, I get it. Let's go ahead and jump into it. So I didn't want to miss that opportunity because I think that was a big change for us.
Yeah.
Well, it may seem small, but it really is kind of a big deal because, we know that the most difficult house to appraise in a subdivision is the first one.
Right.
And that's if it's stick built, site built. The problem is obviously compounded when we're talking manufactured. Make no mistake, we're not talking your grandmother's mobile home. They haven't been called that since the late 70s, I think, 80s? Something like that, 78, whatever it has been. But these are very well built, very well appointed houses, and in a lot of cases, they not only stack up to, but they are superior, as we know with some of our projects. So, Jennifer, I know you've got some comments on the financing side.
So I'm no Fannie Mae that I qualify that, but I think that what I was talking about before is like this whole culture dynamic and culture shift, right? Well, for consumers, it's going to be the same thing. So if you're talking about somebody who's really doing offsite construction and most of the home is built offsite, which is, you know, in the things that I'm reporting on, people I'm talking to, the different companies that are doing it, that's where we're creating the most efficiencies. And that's where we're able to really drive down the price. Well, if you're using that type of process, it is a massive culture shift for the consumer as well, because they have to look at the design and improve it before it goes through the factory, right? Whereas, you know, when you're doing a site build, you're visiting the site and you're being handheld and you're, you know, so it's
a good point.
It's a totally different dynamic. And then also if you're looking at the builder's financing, that's totally different too, because when you need to have the product delivered to the factory and when is that putting pressure on the builder to make sure that their balance sheet is proper, right? So it's just and then when the appraiser has to come to the factory, and then when they're getting, so anyway, it just is a total different shift in process, and there has to be some change management along with some education.
Well, I think that's really important. I mean, and I like the culture shift. There's been some good catchwords,
buzzwords,
but I think the way manufactured has been financed the traditional way, and no disrespect to that way, but if I'm a home buyer and I'm looking at one of the publics and their regular stick built, I look on bakerate.com and I see a 6 or a 7 or whatever it is. I know I'm not supposed to talk about rates, but let's just guess and say I see 6%. Then I walk into a manufactured home dealership and I'm seeing, okay, it might be substantially larger, and I go, well, wait a minute, what's wrong? Why is this product? Why does it take so much more? And we already know that rates are having a substantial impact on the housing market. Well, it's exponentially worse when you're talking about chattel type properties and whatnot. And I think, it's a service issue. And when we've talked about it many times, if we want to compete with the stick built, site built, we have to act like it. And I think, what I love is seeing a lot of these projects, and let's kind of dig into that a little bit because, we've all been involved with them to some extent. We've got Orville, that's 132 units. We've got Moab, that's 180-ish.
87.
You've got Bozeman, you've got
proof of concept.
Joel Farkas's community, yes, and Joel in with Gateway American Resources in Fruition, Colorado. And those are really exciting because I think that helps change the way we look at manufactured. So I'm going to just kind of throw this out, Natalie, you or anybody, let's talk about these truly ground up manufactured home communities.
Yeah. Well, and just real quick, John, you pointed to it, and it was an initiative taken by Skyline Champion, coincidentally, right as COVID hit, right? And so while
they're involved in all of these projects.
Yeah,
that's right.
And that's when we first met. But when they approached us, it was, how do we rebrand Genesis Homes so that it does stand up to a single family builder? And what does that mean? And so what we did was we went down that road where we were going out, we were getting not only the CMA, the comps, but we went in with each builder and breaking down, how do we stand up and build a product, design a product based on a DR Horton or KB Home, right? Because that's your entry level buyer. And that's typically your $200 to $250 price point. So we spent a significant amount of time doing that. And then what happened then was that translated into architecture within Skyline and product design, meaning what features are we putting in down to, John, the foundations. And so what came out of that was a new line that builders and developers can take and run with, standing up next to a single family stick built home, not only Texas wide, but nationwide, North America. And then running into the problem and the roadblocks, not problem, but roadblocks as we were going down this journey was getting in front of municipalities. And Brian knows this well. You know, I can't tell you guys how many times we had to sit in front of city councils and change the narrative on a trailer to a home. It's not a manufactured home. It's a home. A home is a home. True. And so how do we pull away from that and then design this and put it out there so that we can get the buy-in first from municipalities and then start tapping into actual consumers with a price point that is attainable? What happened from there, I think we dive into, because we all know this project well, is Oroville, California. And, you know, W&R Development and James really kind of taking the initiative and designing, finding the property, getting through city council and municipalities, and then bringing that to life, which took 4 years.
And it's been a heck of a team effort. I mean, it was James Burkett's, vision, and to his absolute credit, he stuck through it.
He did.
And I can confidently say that the deal has been closed. The deal actually has been funded. So we are going to, well, I say we, but we're kind of all part of that project, start breaking ground, I believe, next month.
That's amazing.
Yeah, really, really exciting.
But that's your lead in, right? And what we're all talking about today is attainability. Brian will share with you all, I am not a fan of the word affordability. I think it puts us back rather than going forward. And what can I attain? You know, and that we start with attaining a home, then we move into it's an actual home, not a manufactured home, not an MH Advantage, because what we're doing is spinning a wheel of just a scripted story that's old. And how do we bring this to life, hitting the supply that we need to get, Jennifer, like you said, at an attainable rate? Not to keep blabbing, but, you know, we look at, well, John, you talked about the foundations, or, you know, bringing them in on a chassis and then they're still raised slightly off the ground. We definitely will encourage, you know, our listeners and everyone. And it's not a shameless plug, but genesishomes.com. There's a proof of concept community there. A consumer does not know that's a manufactured home when they come.
But I think that's, you know, and taking it a step further, I mean, that's really important because we've, you know, like you said, we have sat in front of these council meetings, and no matter how passionately we try to extol the virtues of manufactured and affordable, they still in their mind have
a trailer
mobile
park.
home, you know, and it doesn't really help if we have to go to a factory. I don't care how good the product is.
Yeah.
If it's sitting on cinder blocks on the side of the road or in a factory in Athens, whatever it may be,
right,
it's not going to have the same impact. And that's why Lockhart is so critical. And that's why some of these other projects are so critical.
Right.
Because I think we're going to start getting adoption, which I think that was is that John's word or Will's word? No. Anyway, but I mean, that's really important.
So, because I think she wants to add to that, and I just wanted to dovetail off of her culture shift, because everything you're talking about, my personal experience with some of the language used in the regulations, there's wording like no trailers, no mobile homes. So it's legacy language that's just never had to be addressed. But the shift is the fact that a borrower, consumer, will go to a site just like they will site-built homes and look at which homes they want. Manufactured housing today, as great as it might be, if you don't have a development, right, a neighborhood, I don't care if it's 10 or 1,010, if you don't have a neighborhood where I can go look and say, I like that model, but I want to change this, I want to add that, I have to do it at the dealer location.
Right.
Dealer location is a different buying model. And if we're honest, it kind of perpetuates that legacy paradigm of what manufactured housing is versus real housing or whatever other language that we've gotten out of our survey. So I think Jennifer's point of the culture shift, this proof of concept in this neighborhood is the way to make that happen. Because if we do everything else, but we still have somebody having to go to a third-party location and pick something out that then gets moved, it doesn't make that full shift. So I just think that that's important piece to all of the work that's being done.
Yeah, and I think that you were talking about, Natalie, some of the production builders who are focusing on this now. And I moderated a panel with John Jaffe, who's the CEO of Lennar, country's second largest builder. So he said that he anticipates that 30 to 50% of all homes will be produced in a factory in the next 5 years. So
Wow.
yeah, right. I mean, so I actually used that in a presentation yesterday, and it's actually a picture of us on the panel, and you can see the surprise on my face in that picture. But, it is just, it's just an indication of where we're headed. And someone else on the panel, which I think is something that we all need to be thinking about, is that Noah Knopf with Bond, he's a principal at Bond, he was saying that housing is a consumer product that is not manufactured. And so I don't think, if we start talking to consumers and production builders start showing what they can do truly with manufacturing, then people will, I think there will be an easy shift, but all of it needs to be happening.
Yeah, and if I could just tie it back to a point Brian made earlier about the personal property financing for the traditional manufactured housing communities. What's interesting is there's a ton of equity capital that floats into that sector, right? But it's all in service of that traditional model, right, where the land and the home are split. The home is in many cases a depreciating asset, and that's arguably not in the best interest of the consumer to buy into, right? So here we have some of these proof of concepts that we're talking about that really break the mold, like in Oroville, right, where it's all a fee simple package. It's a cheaper product to bring to market, and that's a benefit to the consumer. But the long-term security in the land, the permanent foundation, the pride of ownership, all of that's going to translate into wealth building opportunities for the consumer. And it's going to be a big deal for the manufactured housing industry too, because it's going to help them address some of these perception problems that we've been talking about here.
And it definitely goes back to requiring, that culture shift that Jennifer mentioned, because part of it, okay, so Fannie Mae's done a really good job of creating the tools, the financial tools and products and programs that, we as a mortgage company need. Right. But, I'll admit, I was ignorant to it, and I didn't put a lot of focus on it until about 3.5 years ago. When I spent some time with the Fannie Mae guys and Skyline Champion out in freezing Louisville, Kentucky.
January. Yeah.
But I got to experience it, and it just blew my mind because it's not that I turned my nose up at it. I just was ignorant to it. And we've made a substantial cultural shift here at Thrive just to really focus on manufactured, instead of just doing those, regular production builds or, we've had a heavy tilt towards custom builds. But yeah, we've had to create that culture shift, and Jennifer, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more because, I think it takes influencers and you're obviously an influencer in this space. You kind of have this collective, you've got Doug Tollin with Skyline Champion, you've got Ken Semler with Impressa, that sort of thing. How are you, or how should we be getting the word out? Because I think that's what it's going to need to change that culture.
So thank you. I think that's a compliment. And I don't necessarily see myself as an influencer, but I do get to talk to smart people and then share their stories and their ideas. So I, like you said at the beginning, I write on housing innovation for Forbes. And when I trip across somebody who's doing something pretty phenomenal, then I try to write something about it and share it out. Now, you just talked about some of the other folks in the space who are also sharing great stories. And I think they're great advocates to follow and ambassadors to follow. I think there's also like the United States Department of Energy has the ABC Collaborative, which is the advanced building construction. And they have a really, really hot and heavy focus on modular construction right now. Not only for the efficiencies, but also for the quality and the energy gains that we can have from building in a factory and just maintaining that quality and focusing on that. To answer your question, I think that there's so many different opportunities. I would say one of them is to visit and get with people in your local market, and then also follow the technologists and the venture capitalists and see where they're headed as well, because they definitely are interested in this. In March, I presented on a panel with 3 modular builders, Autoval, Joe Wheeler out of Virginia Tech, and Mighty Buildings. And what the people in the room, with being South by Southwest, were very different and unique from going to a housing conference. And it was a lot of developers and investors who are all over this. So I would say that they're great ones to follow too.
Well, I think, and I think we've known for years that, proof of concept is going to be everything. And I think, once these kind of early adopters that you're talking about, Jennifer, once these communities and once this product really starts to, not just be talked about, but actually built and sold, then I think you're going to see kind of an avalanche. I mean, 30% still blows my mind, but it I guess you can really think about it. It's a quicker build time, so there's more turns a year, which is which is a developer's dream. So, and
it addresses the supply, and that's one thing we haven't brought up, in this conversation is, Jennifer, going back to your initial point about supply. These homes are built in less than 2 weeks in a plant, and from the time they're built to delivery, you're in under 30 days. And then you have another, typically what we found with Lockhart was you have about 45 to 60 days of actually getting the home set and finished out, your site work. So we're addressing that. And one thing I wanted to bring up, just hearing what the group is saying when it comes to innovation and technology, Icon is a perfect example of changing a narrative. And
down the street.
Right. In
Literally
Austin.
5 minutes down the street.
They sold immediately. They could not sell them quick enough. Right. And that was at a price point that is not attainable. You're talking
really far from attainable.
Right.
I think they're mid fives up.
I think they started at 550.
And they're smart.
Yeah. And so, we start to see, one innovative technology come out. And I think that also breaks open our doors to the conversations and to the consumer perception of what MH Advantage and what cross mod and modular and ADU is, all of it. But Icon's kind of leading the way on that from a consumer perception. I don't know if you all agree with that. That's how I view.
I think in some ways, yes. I mean, I still love the efforts of Skyline Champion and what they're doing. Absolutely. But you're right. I mean, I think they've been, they started out with that small little, 400 square foot house in Austin. And it was in a tiny home, and it ended up selling for $450, $500, something like that. In this community right down the street, I think it's 150 homes ish that Lennar's doing. I've walked the product. It's a nice product. It's definitely not affordable, but I think what it does is it opens, as you've said, the door for a different type of product. And we see the success of that. And that's why, a lot of these venture capitalists that Jennifer was mentioning, a lot of these groups are saying, okay, wait a minute. What if we can do some form of alternative building, modular, manufactured, whatever, and find a way to get costs down and maybe go a little bit higher density, kind of like some of the conversations we're talking about, with condo regimes and whatnot. That's where I think there's going to be a massive amount of change. So energy efficiency has been brought up a few times. Will, do you want to speak to that and how important that is to Fannie Mae or you specifically?
Yeah, it's definitely important to us. It's a bit of a tenuous conversation if you're talking about the traditional manufactured housing stakeholders. There's going to be some potentially new regulations that change the way that they think about energy efficiency that are coming out through the DOE. And that will probably have the effect of making some of these homes a little less affordable to some of these consumers, right? If you're improving the envelope and the performance, there's some cost that goes into that. But I think that gets back to the perception that we were just talking about, right? I mean, one of the perceptions of manufactured housing is that it's a depreciating asset, and that that's all tied up in whether the home is energy efficient and can perform in the same way that a site-built home can. So we want to see the industry do what it can to try and dispel that myth and maybe orient some of these consumers and some of the players in the market towards building an energy efficient product. You saw a really cool development recently with Clayton Homes, they are the largest builder of manufactured homes in the industry today. They have about 50% market share. They've come out and said, we're going to build all of our manufactured housing product starting in 2024 to the new DOE Zero Energy Ready product. Yeah, which is going to be a really exciting development.
So they're going to get going faster than, most of the production builders. I know, Beazer Homes is putting a ton of effort on, that net zero product and energy efficiency and whatnot. But wow, that's fascinating,
Just like Jim will, right? Always, I swear, he is always taking the lead, even though he's not as active in the company. I had the opportunity about 5 years ago to work with them while they were launching a similar. It was like the first iteration of what we're seeing come out now, i.e., manufactured housing set up in a traditional neighborhood, and the innovation that comes out of Clayton Homes is just mind blowing. Down to the way they have their offices set up with live tickers for every time a home is sold in North America. It's great to hear they're now taking a charge on energy so that we can start standing up to single family.
One thing I think gets missed too, I got this from Kevin Clayton a couple of years back. I think the output, the home itself, is looked at from an energy efficiency perspective, but the build process is so tight that the savings that you have compared to, say, traditional site build in the waste, the usage of tools, the driving to and from the site, whatever you want to, however you want to do it, it would be hard to put a number, but that's also savings, right? Kevin said at one point that a traditional multi-width home at the end of the build, right? It's gone through, it's been assembled. The amount of waste fits into 2 50-gallon drums. So wow. I think all of us have been around a site-built home.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I come from a family where my uncle is a contractor. He's been there for 40-something years. My dad's kind of MacGyver. He does all this stuff. Those guys couldn't put 2 50-gallon drums worth of waste in just an add-on or whatever. There's just no way to do it. So the efficiencies are amazing. And I think that the economies of scale, if we start to move closer to that 30% built, control environment number that Jennifer mentioned, that should further accentuate those efficiencies from an energy perspective, from a waste perspective, et cetera, which then should drive down our cost, right? If I have to boost my energy efficiency, but I'm also able to save because I'm doing more of it, it ends up being a wash, so we can keep that price point fairly flat versus everything right now just seems to be on a northward trajectory that pushes people out that want to get in. And that's the challenge. The other point I think that's key is any supply can be good supply if we're backfilling with the attainable, right? It can't be all manufactured. It can't be all 3D printed. It can't be all site built. Correct. It can't be all high end. We need that mix. So if an alternative comes in and says, I can do whatever $550,000 house that would have cost me $700 as site built, even though that's not what we would consider to be in an attainable dollar category, it still opens that up, which then means the one below that, if there is supply, somebody's able to move in. And I think that's the other piece. We've got to keep it. It goes back to the supply. We got to keep boosting that up in all of these creative ways.
All areas. Yeah, yep. Absolutely. Well, I know everybody's got tight schedules, so what I'd love to hear is, everybody just kind of give your parting shots. Whatever you want to say, in terms of where you think we need to go, what we can do. Jennifer, let's start with you. You're on the spot.
I think that we need to pay attention to the failures in the industry and solve for those, because Katerra came and went, and I'm really happy that they did. And I think there's a lot of learning for us to get from that. And and excited to see the big production builders getting into this. And if they can do if they can show their manufactured housing right next to their site built, maybe that will be a turning point for consumers as well.
Which is exactly what's going on in Fruition. That's that 10,000 unit community in just northeast of Denver that has mostly, or the vast majority is going to be site built. But then you have 680 units that are manufactured, and it'll be really interesting to see the symbiosis between the two. So,
well, and what's nice on that is to again see the evolution. Scott Roberts, who is Roberts Communities, they're Florida, Arizona, and Texas. He launched with a similar concept a few years back, which was an integration of tiny homes, RVs, and manufactured housing. The tiny home portion sold out in 2 days, and this was 5 years ago. And the rest, how that master plan molded together, Jennifer, hearing you say, and Brian, bringing in now single family, we're seeing an evolution. It's just, the pace at which we see it, I think we all would love to kick into high gear.
absolutely. John, Will, parting thoughts?
I'll start. I think so. What we haven't talked about, and I think is important, is single width manufactured housing. So we started that. Deliveries were eligible in February 21. That to me has been a pretty fun little product because we weren't really thought about, let's say agency financing, wasn't thought about for single width. Single width has represented about a 75% since month one of production being in what we would consider to be, let's just call it our affordable bucket, which is 100% area median income or less. That means all the borrowers that are coming through that would hit in that space are going to be qualifying income where it's 100% of the area median income or less. And we've seen 3 out of every 4 of those borrowers that have done single width fall into that category. And that's without us pushing that like we do with, say, our flagship affordable product, which is Home Ready, which caps out the qualifying income at 80% AMI, right? So you have to be a borrower at 80 or less in order to even qualify. Single width, we don't. It doesn't matter what you make. And yet 3 out of every 4 are still falling in. I think it's price point. I mean, we don't have like hard data, but you've got price point, you've got an acceptance of a smaller footprint to the point of the tiny homes, right, where those sold out. I think you got consumers that want that. So I think my parting shot would be anyone listening that's in that lending space or developing space, don't be scared of that. Look into it, consider it. It is an option for those borrowers who would be willing and probably just don't know that they can get secondary market financing for that housing. Now, for us, for manufacturers, it's all got to be real property, but that's fine. People are accepting of that. And I would just encourage the investigation and the research because it's open for business on our side for those single width.
Well, especially at a time when the industry, and sorry, Will, I'll make it really quick, but when we're slower in a lot of areas, if I'm looking at this chart correctly, over 65 million households realistically need to be under that $250,000 price point. That is massive. So anyway, sorry, Will, I just had to act smart and throw in a little stat. But
no, that's all good. Yeah, just to tie it back to the perception point earlier, and single wide's a good example of this. Yeah. Certainly you all deal with it as you're trying to serve stakeholders in the primary market. How do we address perception? How do we bring high quality product to market? We dealt with that here internally too for the single wide. So the thought was, and this is the reason that we didn't allow it. The thought was that these homes don't perform in the same way that traditional double wide and maybe an image advantage type product would. And then we started allowing it on a variance basis. And when we started looking at the data, we found, well, the loans are performing about as well as some of these other products that we're talking about. It's a motivated consumer. It's real property, to John's point. So there's that aspect of it as well. I think we've spent most of this conversation talking about the supply side of the equation, and I think that's really important. But on the demand side, we really need at the end of the day more lenders to take affordable and attainable housing and the products that are paired with those. to take it seriously. You know, we're lucky that Thrive is a great partner and is out there evangelizing on our behalf and making a lot of these relationships. The reality is that some of the mortgage lenders that are out there still have a really outdated perception of
most of them, I think.
Housing. And so, yeah, most of them do, right? And so they choose not to originate these types of loans as a result. And that ends up being a lot of the work that John and I do here at Fannie Mae, is like trying to dispel those myths and try to bring more lenders into our camp to originate these loans.
Or you can just refer them to us. And
There you go.
Shameless.
I knew that was coming. I knew that was coming.
He's fed up.
That was like a softball, by the way.
Right? Selfish, Jennifer.
It was not scripted. Yeah.
There you go. There you go. Well, I so appreciate you all. You know, again, you're here for a reason, because we look at you as really kind of the masterminds behind, you know, or certainly the evangelist is a good word to use for affordable, attainable housing, something that Natalie and I have been talking about for all 3 seasons to some extent, you know, even when we did the homeless series.
Right.
So, you know, and this is a great way to kick off what will ultimately be a 3-part series. So thank you so much, you know, for joining us, sharing your thoughts, and look forward to continued discussion.
Awesome. Thank you so
Thanks for
much.
having us.
Great to learn from you, Will and John. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.